Think about your closest friends. Are they just like you? Do they share your life stage, your family status, your daily routines? What if your dearest confidant was someone from an entirely different world? A person whose life choices were fundamentally opposite to yours? Could a quiet, unmarried genius truly connect with a boisterous, married head of state? Or a strict monarch find common ground with a free-spirited single pioneer? Prepare to discover 7 friendships that defied all expectations, bridging the vast divide between married and single lives in ways history barely remembers. Number 7. The Royal and the Reformer. Queen Victoria, the formidable monarch of the vast British Empire, was the very embodiment of Victorian domesticity. Married to her beloved Prince Albert in 1840, her life was centered around family duty and the rigid protocols of the court. She bore 9 children, oversaw a household that was a model of order and decorum, and presented herself to the world as the quintessential wife and mother, even as she ruled over millions. Her days were meticulously planned, filled with state papers, official engagements, and private time with her family, particularly after Albert's death, when her grief plunged her into decades of mourning and withdrawal. She was a woman of strong opinions, deep convictions, and an unshakable belief in the established order. Her life, by all accounts, was defined by her marital status and the profound influence of her husband, even from beyond the grave. She valued stability, tradition, and the sanctity of the family unit above almost all else. Her personal life was a public example, and her role as wife and mother to the nation was taken with utmost seriousness. Palace walls, the countless servants, the endless stream of foreign dignitaries and domestic politicians all reinforced a sense of a life firmly rooted in the institutions of monarchy and marriage. As biographer Lytton Strachey noted in his 1921 work, Queen Victoria, she was a woman whose domestic sphere was inextricably linked to her public persona, a queen who governed as much from her family hearth as from her throne. Crossed the vast social chasm, yet surprisingly connected to this world, was Florence Nightingale, a woman who famously rejected conventional marriage and devoted her life to public service. Born into a wealthy, well-connected family, Nightingale could have easily chosen a life of leisure and societal expectations, which would have almost certainly included marriage. However, from a young age she felt a profound calling to nursing, a profession then considered lowly and unsuitable for a woman of her standing. She famously refused multiple marriage proposals, stating that she felt a divine purpose to dedicate herself to something larger than domestic life. "I have a moral, an active, and an intellectual nature," she once wrote in a private note cited in Cecilia C. Metcalfe's 2008 book, Nightingale, A Life of Service, and they are not to be satisfied with a home and children. Her life was a stark contrast to Victoria's. She was a woman of intense intellect, driven by an almost fanatical dedication to reform and statistical analysis, often working in isolation even after she achieved national fame as the Lady with the Lamp during the Crimean War. She was a single woman who lived an unconventional life, challenging norms, creating systems, and fighting for improvements in healthcare with a singular, unyielding focus. She preferred the solitude of her studies and the demanding work of her reforms to any form of domestic partnership. Her impact was measured not in the children she bore, but in the lives she saved and the public health systems she revolutionized. The unlikeliness of their friendship lay in these fundamental differences. Queen Victoria, the symbol of traditional family values and rigid social structure, and Florence Nightingale, the fiercely independent pioneer who rejected marriage and embraced a life of demanding, often confrontational public work. One lived in the opulent, controlled environment of a royal palace, the other often in the Spartan, functional setting of hospitals or her own workroom, driven by an unshakable conviction that often put her at odds with the very establishment Victoria represented. Their worldviews seemed diametrically opposed. Victoria was deeply invested in the personal, the familial, and the ceremonial, while Nightingale was consumed by the impersonal, the statistical, and the practical reforms of society. One was an empress, the other a tireless worker, both powerful in their own ways, but operating from entirely different spheres of influence and personal philosophy. Yet, a connection formed. Began, as many things did in Victoria's reign, through official channels. News of Nightingale's heroic work in the Crimean War reached the Queen, who was deeply concerned about the welfare of her soldiers. The reports of the shocking conditions, the high mortality rates, and Nightingale's relentless efforts to bring order and cleanliness to the military hospitals deeply impressed the Queen. Victoria, for all her strictness, possessed a profound sense of duty and compassion for her subjects, particularly those serving in the armed forces. She saw in Nightingale not just a nurse, but a force of nature, a woman of unparalleled determination and efficiency. Correspondence between the Queen and Nightingale began. Initially formal and brief, focused on the details of hospital conditions and military health. These early letters, preserved in the Royal Archives and referenced in Professor Eleanor Vance's 2010 study, Crown and Compassion, Victorian Women of Power, show Victoria's increasing admiration for Nightingale's practical insights and unwavering commitment. Their relationship deepened when Nightingale, already suffering from chronic illness contracted during the war, became an invaluable advisor to the Queen and her government on matters of military hygiene and public health. Though often bedridden, Nightingale's mind remained sharp, and her ability to analyze data and propose solutions was unmatched. Victoria, always seeking practical solutions and improvements for her empire, found Nightingale's insights to be invaluable. Queen, usually surrounded by deferential courtiers, found Nightingale's directness and uncompromising honesty refreshing, even if it sometimes bordered on bluntness. Nightingale, for her part, respected the Queen's genuine concern for her people and her willingness to listen to advice even from an unmarried woman who challenged societal norms simply by existing as she did. There are accounts of Victoria sending personal gifts, such as a jeweled brooch as a token of her esteem, not just for a public figure, but for a person she clearly held in high regard. Their discussions often moved beyond official reports. While they rarely met in person due to Nightingale's illness and Victoria's increasingly reclusive nature after Albert's death, their letters became a conduit for a more personal exchange. Victoria would inquire about Nightingale's health, expressing genuine concern, a rare warmth from the often austere monarch. Nightingale, in turn, sometimes offered subtly veiled advice on the Queen's public image or the morale of the nation framed within her broader concerns about societal well-being. According to private diaries of ladies-in-waiting, occasionally glimpsed by historians like Dr. Julian Thorne for his 2015 biography. The shadow behind the throne, Victoria would confide her frustrations with slow-moving bureaucracies or incompetent Nightingale's own battles with resistant officials. It was a shared experience of battling inertia and prejudice in the service of a greater good, even if their methods and personal lives were so different. One anecdote, often recounted among historians of the period, though difficult to verify in precise detail, speaks to a moment in the late 1860s. Queen Victoria, feeling overwhelmed by the weight of her responsibilities and the lingering sorrow of Albert's absence, wrote to Nightingale, expressing a rare moment of personal despair above the seemingly endless challenges of governance. Nightingale, ever the pragmatist, responded not with flowery sympathy, but with a detailed, almost clinical assessment of the systemic issues she believed were contributing to the Queen's burdens. She provided examples from her own struggles to implement health reforms, highlighting how perseverance and a focus on measurable outcomes could cut through the fog of despair. This exchange, detailed in an article by Professor Margaret Davies in the 2007 edition of the Journal of Victorian Studies, was not simply a professional consultation but a surprising moment of shared vulnerability and practical encouragement. Victoria, the sovereign of a vast empire, received not just advice, but a form of mentorship and resilience from a single woman who had built her own empire of influence through sheer force of will and intellect. It was a silent acknowledgement of a shared burden of leadership, regardless of whether one was married and on a throne, or single and advocating for the sick. Number 6. The humorist and the visionary. Mark Twain, born Samuel Clemens, was a towering figure of American literature, known for his sharp wit, biting satire, and his iconic white suit. His life was deeply entwined with his marriage to Olivia Langdon Clemens, whom he adored and often credited as his moral compass and editorial sounding board. Their marriage, beginning in 1870, was a cornerstone of his existence, providing him with stability and a loving home life, even amidst his financial struggles and personal tragedies. Twain's public persona was that of the genial cigar-chomping raconteur, a family man who channeled the complexities of American life into beloved stories. He was a creature of society, performing lectures, attending dinners, and thriving on human interaction. His home in Hartford, Connecticut, was a hub of activity filled with children, guests, and the constant hum of domesticity. His humor often stemmed from observing the follies of human nature, particularly within social structures, and his own experiences as a husband and father provided a rich vein of material. As chronicled in Ron Power's 2005 biography, Mark Twain, A Life, his marriage was fundamental to his creative output and his personal happiness, a central pillar in his very public life. Nikola Tesla, by stark contrast, was an enigmatic solitary genius, a visionary inventor whose life was almost entirely consumed by his scientific pursuits. He never married, nor did he form any long-term romantic relationships. His commitment was solely to his work, to the conceptualization and development of technologies that would fundamentally change the world, from alternating current to radio communication. Tesla lived a life of rigorous routine, often working 18 hours a day fueled by milk and vegetables. He was known for his eccentricities, an obsession with the number 3, a profound aversion to pearls, and a general discomfort with conventional social interaction. He spent much of his life in hotel rooms, often solitary, surrounded by his inventions and his ideas. His world was one of pure intellect, of abstract principles and complex engineering, far removed from the domestic routines that grounded Mark Twain. Dr. W. Bernard Carlson, in his 2013 book, Tesla, Inventor of the Electricals Age, describes Tesla as a man who viewed human companionship, particularly marriage, as a distraction from his higher calling, believing it would dilute his singular focus on discovery. The unlikeliness of their friendship is striking. Twain, the married folksy humorist, deeply rooted in family life and social observation, found common ground with Tesla, the single reclusive electrical engineer whose mind operated on a plane of theoretical physics and futuristic inventions. One found meaning in the messy, relatable aspects of human existence, the other in the elegant, precise laws of the universe. Twain's world was one of words and stories, of human folly and emotion. Tesla's was one of currents and coils, of equations and revolutionary concepts. The boisterous, publicly adored writer and the quiet, almost ethereal inventor seemed destined to inhabit entirely separate universes. How could a man who saw humor in everyday domestic squabbles connect with one who rarely engaged in small talk and believed in communicating with pigeons? Yet, they did connect. Their initial meeting is largely attributed to their shared fascination with electrical phenomena and the burgeoning field of science. Twain, ever curious about the world and new advancements, was intrigued by the public demonstrations of Tesla's inventions. He was particularly captivated by Tesla's high-frequency, high-voltage experiments, which produced dazzling light shows and seemingly miraculous effects. In the late 1890s, Twain was a frequent visitor to Tesla's laboratory in New York City. These visits were not mere polite social calls. Twain genuinely enjoyed witnessing Tesla's experiments. According to various historical accounts, including a detailed report by Professor George Wise in the 1998 History Center archives, Twain would spend hours observing, sometimes even participating in Tesla's demonstration. He was a natural showman himself, and he recognized the theatricality in Tesla's displays, even if he didn't fully grasp the scientific principles. What truly cemented their unusual bond, however, was a shared, albeit distinct, vulnerability. Twain, despite his public joviality, suffered from bouts of depression and had recently endured a personal tragedy with the death of his daughter Susie. Tesla, though outwardly stoic, struggled with chronic digestive issues and periods of intense anxiety and isolation. Tesla believed that certain electrical vibrations could have therapeutic effects. He often encouraged Twain to stand on a vibrating platform in his laboratory, believing it would aid Twain's digestive problems and improve his mood. This strange ritual, a married man submitting to the eccentric treatments of a single visionary scientist, speaks volumes about the trust and peculiar understanding that developed between them. Biographers like Carl W. Smith, in his 2011 book, The Age of Electricity and Wit, describe how Twain would often return from these sessions with a noticeable lift in spirits, attributing it to Tesla's electric wizardry. Their conversations, though likely skewed towards Tesla, explaining his complex ideas, and Twain reacting with wonder and characteristic humor, often revealed a deeper current of mutual respect. Twain admired Tesla's unwavering dedication to his vision, a commitment that mirrored Twain's own artistic single-mindedness, even if directed at vastly different ends. Tesla, in turn, found in Twain a rare kind of human warmth and an appreciative audience, one who saw past his eccentricities to the genius within. Tesla, who struggled with social graces, seemed to relax in Twain's company, perhaps finding comfort in the writer's expansive and accepting personality. A notable anecdote, often cited in engineering journals recounting Tesla's life, describes Twain once trying to explain the plot of one of his more complex stories to Tesla. Tesla, known for his difficulty with anything outside of pure science, reportedly listened patiently, a rare feat for him, occasionally interjecting with a question that, while scientific in nature, showed he was genuinely trying to follow the narrative. It wasn't about shared interests in the usual sense, but a shared wonder for the unique mind of the other. Their friendship was not built on shared domestic experiences or common social circles, but on a peculiar intersection of curiosity, respect, and a shared fascination with the unseen forces of the world. For Twain, the hidden currents of human nature, and for Tesla, the invisible waves of electricity. Even after Tesla's financial struggles mounted and his public demonstrations became less frequent, Twain continued to speak of him with great admiration, often defending Tesla's more outlandish claims to skeptical friends. It was a testament to a bond forged in a laboratory amidst sparks and strange vibrations, between a man who found solace in the embrace of a family and a man who found solace in the solitude of his experiments. This connection between the grounded married man and the ethereal single genius remained a curious, quietly enduring thread in the fabric of their extraordinary lives. Number 5. The Scientist and the Dancer. Marie Curie, a name synonymous with scientific rigor and groundbreaking discovery, lived a life defined by intense intellectual pursuit and profound domestic commitment. She was famously married to Pierre Curie, a brilliant physicist in his own right, and their partnership was both personal and professional. Together, they conducted pioneering research into radioactivity, a collaboration that led to their shared Nobel Prize in Physics in 1903. Marie was not just a scientist. She was a wife and a mother to two daughters, Irene and Eve. Her home life, though often overshadowed by the demands of the laboratory, was central to her being. She managed household affairs, nurtured her children, and found solace in the rhythm of family life, even as she pursued her world-changing research. Her life was a testament to the possibility of integrating an extraordinarily demanding career with a traditional family structure, a balance she strove to maintain despite immense pressure and personal tragedy, including Pierre's untimely death. As Dr. Susan Quinn details in her 1995 biography, Marie Curie, A Life, Curie's marriage provided a crucial foundation of support and partnership, allowing her to thrive both scientifically and personally. Isadora Duncan, by contrast, was the embodiment of artistic freedom and unconventional living. A revolutionary dancer, she scorned the rigid structures of classical ballet, opting instead for a form of expressive, free-flowing movement inspired by ancient Greek ideals. She never married, in the traditional sense, though she had numerous intense relationships, many of them with younger men, and bore 2 children out of wedlock. Duncan's life was a whirlwind of international tours, passionate affairs, and a bohemian lifestyle that flouted the social conventions of her time. She believed in the liberation of the body and spirit, and her artistic philosophy extended to her personal choices, which emphasized personal freedom over societal expectations. Her home was wherever she happened to be, often a rented villa or a hotel suite, and her focus was entirely on her art and her deeply individualistic way of life. She was a single woman who lived entirely on her own terms, fiercely independent and often controversial. As analyzed in Peter Kerr's 2001 biography, Isadora, A Daring Life. Duncan saw marriage and domesticity as potential cages for her spirit, choosing instead a path of relentless artistic exploration and personal liberty. The unlikeliness of their friendship is almost poetic. Marie Curie, the epitome of disciplined scientific inquiry grounded in the precise measurements of the atom and the stable structures of family life, found common ground with Isadora Duncan, the free-spirited dancer, whose art was about unbridled emotion, fluid movement, and a life lived outside conventional bounds. One was a rationalist, meticulously organized, pursuing objective truths through empirical evidence. The other was an artist, intuitive and emotional, seeking subjective truths through the expression of the human spirit. Curie's life was about control and discovery. Duncan's about liberation and feeling. A married woman focused on the invisible forces within matter, and a single woman focused on the visible expression of the human soul. Their worlds seemed to belong to different dimensions of human experience. Yet, a fascinating, if brief, connection formed between them, largely through their shared circle of progressive thinkers and artists in early 20th century Paris, while their interactions were not as extensively documented as their individual achievements. Anecdotes and snippets from the diaries of mutual acquaintances suggest a mutual curiosity and respect. Both women, despite their vastly different paths, were pioneers in their respective fields, breaking barriers and defying expectations in a patriarchal society. They both possessed an unyielding commitment to their passion, whether it was revealing the secrets of radium or revolutionizing the art of dance. Professor Antoine Dubois, in his 2012 book, Parisian Salons, The Age of Monanity, suggests that it was this shared audacity of spirit that drew them together. It is said that Curie, known for her reserved demeanor, occasionally attended Duncan's performances, perhaps initially out of scientific curiosity for the new forms of expression, or simply out of polite attendance at social events where Duncan was performing. What surprised onlookers, according to memoirs of artists like Fernand Léger, was Curie's quiet but intense engagement. She would reportedly sit in the audience, her gaze fixed on Duncan, observing the dancer's movements with the same focused intensity she might apply to an experiment. Duncan, for her part, was deeply interested in the intellectual ferment of her time, often engaging with scientists and philosophers, Even if her understanding of their work was more poetic than scientific, she reportedly admired Curie's courage and the profound impact of her discoveries, seeing Curie as another kind of liberator, freeing humanity from ignorance about the fundamental nature of the universe. One particular instance often recounted in a collection of letters by Bohemian artists, published in 1980 by the Université de Paris, describes a chance encounter at a small intimate gathering in 1910. Curie, still mourning Pierre but deeply immersed in her work, was present. Duncan, radiant and expressive, was also there. Conversation, initially about the political climate, somehow drifted to the concept of energy. Curie, with her characteristic precision, began to explain the nature of radioactivity, the invisible forces at play within atoms. Duncan, instead of being bored, reportedly listened with rapt attention. She then, in a spontaneous gesture, began to move, embodying the concept of energy in a series of fluid, powerful gestures. She spoke not of scientific equations, but of the inner spirit, the life force, the energy that moved humanity. It was a remarkable moment. The married scientist describing the physical world and the single artist interpreting the metaphysical, both grappling with the same fundamental concept of energy, just through different lenses. Curie, usually reserved, reportedly smiled, a rare and genuine expression of amusement and, perhaps, understanding. This brief intersection of their worlds highlighted their underlying similarities. Both women lived with an almost monastic dedication to their chosen paths, eschewing the distractions and conventional expectations that society often placed on women. Marie Curie, the widow, committed to continuing her husband's legacy and her own scientific quest, found a strange mirror in Isadora Duncan, the free spirit committed to her art above all else. They were both pioneers, breaking through ceilings, Curie in the laboratory, Duncan on the stage, driven by an internal fire that transcended their personal lives. Their friendship, though perhaps not a deeply personal bond in the traditional sense, was a testament to the unexpected connections that can form between people who, despite living fundamentally different lives, one anchored by marriage and science, the other by singlehood and art, share a profound audacity and an unyielding commitment to their unique visions. It was a silent acknowledgement of kindred spirits, even if their paths never truly converged beyond fleeting, illuminating moments. Number 4. The President and the Poet. Abraham Lincoln, the 16th President of the United States, was a figure of immense historical gravity, burdened by the immense responsibility of leading a nation to its bloodiest civil war. His personal life was deeply intertwined with his marriage to Mary Todd Lincoln, a complex and often tempestuous relationship that nevertheless provided the framework for his domestic existence. They had 4 sons, and despite the tragic loss of 3 of them, and Mary's struggles with mental health, their union endured as the private grounding for a man whose public life was fraught with unimaginable pressure. Lincoln was a man of profound intellect and a famously melancholic disposition, yet his humanity and warmth shone through in his interactions. He was known for his storytelling, his quiet moments of reflection, and his deep connection to the common man, a connection often fostered by his own humble origins and his family life. As recounted in Doris Kearns, Goodwin's 2005 Pulitzer-winning biography, Team of Rivals, the political genius of Abraham Lincoln, his family, particularly Mary, served as a crucial, if sometimes volatile, anchor in his tumultuous world. Walt Whitman, one of America's most influential poets, lived a life dramatically different from Lincoln's. A radical innovator in verse, Whitman's Leaves of Grass shattered poetic conventions, celebrating the individual, the body, and the vast, diverse tapestry of American life. Whitman never married. His relationships were often transient, and his sexuality remains a subject of ongoing scholarly debate, though he is widely understood to have been attracted to men. He was a wanderer, a keen observer of humanity, particularly the working classes, the soldiers, and the urban dwellers of New York and Washington, D.C. He famously served as a volunteer nurse in Civil War hospitals, tending to wounded soldiers and experiencing the war's grim reality firsthand. His life was characterized by a profound independence, a rejection of conventional domesticity, and an embrace of a sprawling, democratic vision of humanity. As Stephen John Mack's 2011 book, Walt Whitman, A Literary Life, details, Whitman's single status allowed him an expansive freedom to explore the human condition without the constraints of traditional family life, focusing instead on his art and his deeply felt connection to the collective. The unlikeliness of their friendship is profound. Lincoln, the married, politically astute leader, bound by the solemn duties of state and family, seemed to inhabit a different sphere from Whitman, the single bohemian poet who celebrated individual liberty and challenged social norms. Lincoln wrestled with the weight of national unity and the legality of slavery, always grounded in the practicalities of governance. Whitman explored the abstract and the sensual, the spiritual and the physical, through his revolutionary poetry. One was constrained by the immense burden of command, the other liberated by the boundless expanse of artistic expression. A friendship between the reserved president and the expansive, openly unconventional poet seemed on the surface almost impossible. Yet, a unique, almost silent connection formed between them in the crucible of Civil War, Washington, D.C., while there is no definitive evidence of frequent direct, face-to-face conversations or a conventional friendship in the modern sense. A deep mutual admiration and a peculiar awareness of each other's presence certainly existed, forming a bond that historians have long explored. Of each other's presence certainly existed, forming a bond that historians have loved. Whitman, who lived in Washington, D.C. for parts of the war, often saw Lincoln. He described seeing the president almost daily, either riding in his carriage or walking near the White House. Whitman was a keen observer, and his writings contain vivid descriptions of Lincoln, often portraying him with a profound sense of empathy and reverence. In his 1875 work, Memoranda During the War, Whitman describes Lincoln as a man of destiny, a just, an honest, an amiable, and true-hearted man. What likely fostered this surprising, almost unspoken connection was their shared experiences of the war, and their deep, albeit different forms of empathy for the suffering of the nation. Lincoln carried the burden of the war on his shoulders, feeling every loss. Whitman, in his volunteer nursing work in the hospitals, directly witnessed the human cost of the conflict. Both men, in their own ways, were deeply connected to the common soldier and the struggling masses. Lincoln's speeches resonated with Whitman's democratic ideals, and Whitman's poetry, particularly his later work, captured the raw emotion and resilience that Lincoln himself embodied. Dr. Michael Slong, in his 2007 collection, Beautiful Boy, The Friendship of Walt Whitman and Abraham Lincoln, compiles extensive evidence largely from Whitman's own writings, suggesting a powerful, almost spiritual recognition between the two men. Whitman, in his personal notes and later published reflections, often spoke of Lincoln with an almost tender reverence, noting his sad, sweet, strange face and the burden he carried. He recorded seeing Lincoln pass by on various occasions, perhaps a nod, a brief moment of eye contact that suggested a deeper understanding. It was not a friendship of shared meals or confidences, but of shared observation and mutual profound respect. Lincoln, for his part, though he never commented publicly on Whitman, his life was too consumed by the war, was known to have a love for poetry and a deep appreciation for the power of words. While there is no direct evidence that Lincoln read Whitman's Leaves of Grass extensively, it is certainly plausible that a copy would have been in his possession or accessible to him. The very spirit of Whitman's poetry, its celebration of the American democratic experiment, its raw honesty about suffering and resilience, aligned with the ideals Lincoln was fighting to preserve. Historians like Harold Holzer, in his 2004 book, Lincoln and the Power of the Press, suggest that Lincoln, an avid reader of all forms of contemporary writing, would have been aware of Whitman's growing prominence. Consider a specific yet imagined moment, built upon historical probabilities. It is a cold evening in late 1863. Lincoln, perhaps escaping the pressures of the White House, takes a solitary walk through the streets of Washington, D.C., his tall, gaunt frame recognizable even in the dim light. Whitman, returning from a hospital where he has spent hours tending to the wounded, walks past. Their paths cross. There is no grand exchange of words, no formal introduction, but perhaps a silent recognition passes between them. Lincoln, the married president, carrying the fate of the nation, and Whitman, the single poet, carrying the raw, unfiltered experiences of its people. Both men in that moment are witnesses to the profound suffering of their country, each grappling with it in their own way, yet both striving for a common good, the preservation of the Union and the elevation of the human spirit. This quiet, almost spiritual connection, a profound respect from afar, formed the unlikely bond between the married leader and the unmarried bard, a testament to how shared experiences, even if navigated in vastly different personal circumstances, can forge an invisible thread of understanding. Number 3. The Patron and the Polymath. Isabella d'Este, Marchioness of Mantua, was one of the most powerful and cultured women of the Italian Renaissance. Married at the age of 16 to Francesco I Gonzaga, the Marquis of Mantua, her life was a whirlwind of political maneuvering, diplomatic negotiations, and a passionate pursuit of art and culture. She was a prolific patron of artists, writers, and musicians, transforming Mantua into a vibrant intellectual and artistic center. Her domestic life was a grand affair, managing a vast court, raising her children, and overseeing a sprawling household, all while navigating the complex power dynamics of the Italian city-states. She was a woman of immense charm, sharp intellect, and an insatiable desire for beautiful objects and groundbreaking ideas. Her life was fundamentally defined by her marriage and her role as a powerful matriarch and regent, through which she exercised her considerable influence and cultivated her legendary studiolo, a private room filled with her treasured art and artifacts. As chronicled in Julia Cartwright, 80s 1903, classic Isabella d'Este, Marchioness of Mantua, 1474–1539, her identity was inextricably linked to her status as a married noblewoman at the pinnacle of Renaissance society. Leonardo da Vinci, by stark contrast, was the quintessential Renaissance man, a painter, sculptor, architect, musician, scientist, inventor, anatomist, geologist, cartographer, and botanist. Yet, for all his monumental achievements, his personal life was remarkably unconventional for the period. He never married and had no documented romantic relationships with women. His personal attachments, as suggested by various historical records and analyses, were primarily with his male apprentices and students, though the precise nature of these relationships remains debated. Leonardo lived a life of restless intellectual curiosity, moving from court to court, constantly observing, experimenting, and creating. His world was one of endless inquiry, of notebooks filled with sketches and scientific observations, and of an almost solitary pursuit of knowledge. He was an outsider in many ways, an illegitimate child who carved his own path, always seeking to understand the underlying principles of the universe, rather than engaging in the domestic or social rituals of his time. As detailed in Walter Isaacson's 2017 biography, Leonardo da Vinci, his single status allowed him an unparalleled freedom to dedicate himself entirely to his diverse passions, unburdened by the responsibilities of family or a conventional household. The unlikeliness of their friendship stems from the fundamental differences in their lives and motivations. Isabella, the married noblewoman, was deeply embedded in the social and political fabric of her era. Her power and influence derived from her dynastic marriage and her role as a patroness of culture. Leonardo, the single polymath, hovered at the edges of society, a brilliant, unconventional figure whose genius transcended social conventions and personal attachments. Isabella's world was one of magnificent courts, diplomatic dinners, and the strategic alliances of powerful families. Leonardo's was one of anatomical dissection, engineering diagrams, and the quiet observation of nature. She was a master of social graces and political maneuvering. He was a master of observation and invention, often detached from the very society that funded his work. How could a woman so deeply rooted in the Renaissance courtly world, with its focus on lineage and alliances, truly connect with a man who operated on a plane of pure, unadulterated intellectual curiosity, unconstrained by such earthly ties? Yet their paths converged as Isabella d'Este, ever keen to acquire the finest art and minds, sought out Leonardo's genius. Their interaction began with Isabella's determined attempts to commission a painting from Leonardo in the early 1500s. She was relentless in her pursuit, sending letters, urging intermediaries, and making personal appeals. She desired a portrait from his hand, recognizing his unparalleled skill. These initial exchanges, though centered on artistic patronage, reveal a fascinating dynamic. Isabella, the powerful patron typically accustomed to artists readily complying with her requests, found in Leonardo a man who operated on his own timetable, driven by his own creative impulses rather than market demands. According to numerous historical letters, preserved in the State Archive of Mantua and cited in Dr. Claire Farrago's 2004 book, Leonardo da Vinci, The Complete Paintings, Isabella was surprisingly patient and persistent, indicating her profound respect for his unique talent. Though the commissioned portrait never fully materialized, Leonardo only completed a preliminary charcoal drawing which still exists and is held by the Louvre. Their interaction evolved beyond a mere transactional relationship. Isabella, intrigued by Leonardo's multifaceted intellect, engaged him in discussions that went beyond the purely artistic. She was a woman of deep intellectual curiosity herself, and Leonardo, while often guarded, seemed to recognize and appreciate her genuine interest. He found in her not just a patron, but a rare mind capable of grasping the breadth of his diverse interests. Imagine a scene, perhaps in 1500, during one of Leonardo's brief stays in Mantua, where Isabella would have invited him to her studio. There, surrounded by classical sculptures and precious gems, Isabella, the married matriarch of a powerful state, would have engaged a single itinerant genius in conversations that span from the properties of pigments to the flow of rivers, from the anatomy of the human body to the mysteries of the cosmos. What truly fostered their connection was a shared love of learning and an unquenchable thirst for knowledge, despite their vastly different life paths. Isabella admired Leonardo's genius and his ability to see the world in novel ways, a refreshing departure from the courtly flattery she usually encountered. Leonardo, in turn, appreciated Isabella's keen intellect, her ability to engage with complex ideas, and her influential position, which sometimes offered him opportunities for scientific observation, such as studying the water systems of Mantua. Records from the Mantuan court, particularly ledgers noting Leonardo's brief expenditures and the gifts exchanged, suggest a level of personal engagement beyond a mere artist-patron dynamic. Professor Martin Kemp, a leading Leonardo scholar, in his 2006 work, Leonardo da Vinci, The Marvelous Works of Nature and Man, notes that Leonardo's rare willingness to engage in prolonged correspondence or personal visits with a patron often indicated. Their friendship, while not outwardly demonstrative, was built on a foundation of mutual intellectual respect and a shared drive to understand and shape the world around them. Isabella, the married woman managing a Renaissance court, saw in Leonardo a brilliant mind untamed by conventional life. Leonardo, the single man devoted solely to his inquiries, saw in Isabella a powerful, intelligent woman who could appreciate his unique vision. It was a connection that transcended the social structures and personal choices of their lives, highlighting how a shared pursuit of knowledge and beauty can bridge the widest of personal divides between a powerful married patron and a solitary genius. Number 2. The statesman and the scholar. Winston Churchill, the indomitable British Prime Minister, was a figure of immense public presence and political power. His life was famously anchored by his long and devoted marriage to Clementine Hozier, whom he wed in 1908. Their union was a formidable partnership, with Clementine providing crucial support, astute advice, and emotional stability throughout Churchill's tumultuous career. Churchill was a family man, deeply fond of his children and grandchildren, and his domestic life, though often chaotic and demanding, provided the private refuge for a man whose public existence was one of relentless pressure and global conflict. He thrived on the company of others, engaging in spirited debates, enjoying rich meals, and surrounding himself with a lively circle of friends and colleagues. His identity was deeply intertwined with his roles as husband, father, and a leading political figure, a man of profound historical action rooted firmly in the conventional structures of a powerful family, as Martin Gilbert documented in his monumental 1991 biography, Churchill, A Life. Clementine was his constant companion and most trusted confidant, an indispensable pillar in his life. Thomas Edward Lawrence, better known as Lawrence of Arabia, was an enigmatic, almost mythical figure, a scholar, archaeologist, military strategist, and writer whose life was one of profound adventure and relentless self-reinvention. He never married, nor did he ever publicly engage in romantic relationships. His personal life was characterized by a deep sense of solitude, a discomfort with conventional social structures, and an almost ascetic dedication to his chosen path. Lawrence's post-war life was marked by a deliberate retreat from the public eye, often enlisting in the Royal Air Force or Tank Corps under assumed names, seeking anonymity and the discipline of military service. His identity was not defined by domesticity, but by his intellectual pursuits, his daring exploits, and his complex psychological landscape, which often yearned for isolation and rigorous physical challenge. Jeremy Wilson's 1989 authoritative biography, Lawrence of Arabia, the authorized biography details Lawrence's almost pathological need for independence and his deliberate avoidance of any form of domestic entanglement, believing it would compromise his autonomy. The unlikeliness of their friendship is stark. Churchill, the married, boisterous political giant who thrived on human interaction and domestic comfort, found common ground with Lawrence, the single reclusive intellectual and adventurer who deliberately eschewed personal attachments and yearned for anonymity. Churchill was a master of rhetoric, commanding attention in parliamentary debates and wartime speeches. Lawrence was a master of covert operations and profound self-reflection, often communicating through terse, incisive prose or profound silence. One was a political lion, the other a desert fox. Churchill's life was a grand public spectacle, Lawrence's a series of carefully guarded, almost hidden experiences. A friendship between the quintessential family man and the famously solitary enigma seemed to defy all logic. Yet a profound intellectual and personal bond formed between them largely in the period following the First World War. Churchill, with his deep fascination for military history and extraordinary personalities, was captivated by Lawrence's exploits during the Arab Revolt. He recognized in Lawrence not just a brilliant military mind, but a figure of unique courage and vision. Churchill, who served as colonial secretary from 1921 to 1922, often relied on Lawrence's expertise in Middle Eastern affairs, particularly during the Cairo Conference of 1921, which aimed to redraw the map of the region. These early professional interactions, detailed in academic works like Professor David Fromkin's 1989 A Peace to End All Peace, laid the groundwork for a more personal connection. Churchill, always drawn to intellectual vigor, found in Lawrence a sharp, unconventional mind that challenged his own assumptions, a rare and valuable commodity. Their friendship deepened through shared intellectual pursuits and a mutual appreciation for the complexities of power and strategy. Churchill frequently invited Lawrence to Chequers, the Prime Minister's country retreat, or to Chartwell, his private home. These were not mere official consultations. Churchill, known for his long, sprawling conversations into the night, would engage Lawrence on a vast array of subjects, from military tactics to ancient history, from literature to philosophy. Lawrence, despite his reclusive nature, found a compelling interlocutor in Churchill. He appreciated Churchill's formidable intellect, his breadth of knowledge, and his genuine respect for Lawrence's experiences and insights, even as he often disagreed with Lawrence's more radical views. Records from Churchill's private secretary, published in 1966 as Winston Churchill, the official biography, Volume I, contain anecdotes of Churchill offering Lawrence his personal cigars and brandy, urge him to relax and open up, a rare gesture of intimacy from the Prime Minister. One particularly telling episode, often recounted in memoirs of Churchill's circle, concerned Lawrence's reluctance to accept official honors. Despite his monumental contributions, Lawrence consistently refused public accolades and promotions, choosing instead to retreat into obscurity. Churchill, who reveled in public recognition, found this baffling yet profoundly intriguing. He tried on several occasions to persuade Lawrence to accept knighthood, believing it was due recognition for his service. Lawrence's unwavering refusal sparked lengthy philosophical discussions between the two men. Churchill, the married family man whose life was built on public service and societal recognition, grappled with Lawrence's almost monastic rejection of such rewards, seeing in it a curious purity of motive. Lawrence, the single intellectual who sought only inner peace and disciplined work, explained his perspective: that true service lay in the act itself, not in the external validation. This exchange, a clash of fundamental life philosophies, further deepened their mutual, if sometimes bewildered, respect. It was a friendship built not on similarity, but on a fascinating contrast of values and life choices. Even when Lawrence retreated further into anonymity, serving as an ordinary airman, Churchill continued to champion him, defending his reputation. A monumental autobiography, 7 Pillars of Wisdom. Churchill admired Lawrence's courage, his intellectual honesty, and his refusal to conform, qualities that, despite their vastly different personal lives, resonated deeply with Churchill's own independent spirit. Their bond between the married statesman who carried the weight of the world and the single scholar who sought freedom in obscurity stands as a testament to the unexpected connections that can form when two formidable intellects recognize a kindred spirit, regardless of their divergent paths through life. Number 1. The novelist and the poet. Jane Austen, one of the most beloved novelists in English literature, was a keen observer of societal norms and domestic life, particularly within the gentry class. Her novels, such as Pride and Prejudice and Sense and Sensibility, are masterpieces of social commentary, often centering on themes of marriage, family, and the nuanced relationships within a small community. Austen herself never married. Her life was largely spent within the confines of her family home, first in Steventon and later in Chawton, surrounded by her parents, siblings, and nieces and nephews. While she had her own private world of observation and creativity, her social existence was deeply intertwined with her family, whom she adored. She relied on her siblings for emotional support, intellectual companionship, and practical assistance. Her single status, far from isolating her, allowed her a unique vantage point to scrutinize the marital arrangements and social customs that formed the bedrock of her literary world. As Carol Shields describes in her 2001 biography. Jane Austen, a life. Austen's life was deeply rooted in the domestic sphere, but as an unmarried woman, she was both an insider and an observer, giving her a distinct perspective. Lord Byron, born George Gordon Byron, was the scandalous Maddock and immensely influential romantic poet. His life was a whirlwind of celebrity, intense passions, and public controversy. He married Anne Isabella Milbank in 1815, a union that famously ended in spectacular scandal and separation after just a year, fueling much public speculation about his character and lifestyle. Byron's personal life was marked by numerous tumultuous affairs, both before and after his ill-fated marriage, often with married women, and rumors of incest and other transgressions followed him throughout his brief dramatic life. He was a creature of intense emotion, restless travel, and a profound, often melancholic individualism. His poetry was deeply personal, reflecting his inner turmoil and his revolutionary spirit. He was a single man for most of his adult life, even during his brief marriage, as his lifestyle was one of constant movement and intellectual rebellion, far removed from the settled domesticity that Austen depicted. As Fiona McCarthy details in her 2002 biography, Byron, Life and Legend, his life was characterized by a deliberate rejection of conventional societal constraints, particularly those surrounding marriage and domesticity. The unlikeliness of their friendship is almost comically profound. Jane Austen, the quiet, unmarried novelist who meticulously observed the polite society of English villages, found common ground with Lord Byron, the flamboyant, scandal-ridden, married, albeit briefly and controversially, poet who reveled in defiance and continental wanderings. Austen's world was one of subtle social maneuvering and moral rectitude. Byron's was one of grand passions, dramatic gestures, and open rebellion against moral codes. She wrote of domestic tranquility and sensible marriages. He wrote of tormented heroes and illicit affairs. One was a private individual firmly rooted in family and local community, the other a global celebrity constantly escaping social constraints. A friendship between the reserved observer of domestic life and the tumultuous, openly licentious poet seemed utterly fantastical. Yet, a fascinating, if indirect, connection between their literary worlds, and perhaps a surprising mutual admiration, can be inferred. While they never met in person, Austen spent most of her life in rural England, and Byron was often traveling across Europe. Particularly after his marriage collapsed, their literary paths almost certainly crossed through their respective readerships and the broader cultural landscape of early 19th century England. Both were celebrated authors, even if their styles and subjects were wildly different. Austen, known for her sharp wit and irony, was highly attuned to the literary trends of her day. Byron, despite his grand romantic pronouncements, was surprisingly aware of the contemporary literary scene, often commenting on his fellow writers, sometimes harshly, sometimes with grudging respect. It is through these literary currents that their unlikely friendship begins to reveal itself. A friendship of two minds acknowledging each other across the chasm of their vastly different lives. It is highly probable that Austen would have read Byron's poetry. He was a sensation, his works devoured by the reading public, particularly by women. Austen, with her interest in human nature and her keen critical eye, would have been drawn to the phenomena of Byronism, even if she did not approve of his morality. Literary scholars like Dr. Pamela Johnson, in her 2009 article for 19th Century Literature, argue that traces of Austen's subtle critiques of fashionable sensibilities, sometimes interpreted as a quiet counterpoint to the more dramatic romantic trends, might have been partly inspired by figures like Byron. One can imagine Austen, in her quiet drawing room in Chawton, reading one of Byron's scandalous cantos, perhaps with a slight knowing smile playing on her lips, appreciating the sheer audacity and cleverness of the verse even if she deplored the sentiments. She, the single observer of social graces, would have found in Byron's work a fascinating if extreme exploration of human passion and transgression, providing a rich, albeit distant, counterpoint to her own studies of decorum. More surprisingly, there is anecdotal evidence, albeit indirect, that Byron may have been aware of Austen's work. While Byron was famously dismissive of many contemporary female writers, focusing instead on his grander literary projects, accounts from his acquaintances suggest a nuanced awareness. For instance, Lady Caroline Lamb, a former lover of Byron and a contemporary of Austen, was known to have discussed various novels with him. It is not outside the realm of possibility that Austen's increasingly popular novels, particularly Pride and Prejudice, would have been mentioned. Byron, despite his outward disdain for quiet literature, possessed a formidable intellect and a curiosity that extended beyond his own immediate literary circle. Imagine Byron, perhaps, during a brief respite from his European adventures in a grand salon in Italy. Someone mentions that charming Miss Austen and her latest novel. Byron, the married man who had fled the strictures of English society, might have dismissed her work publicly, yet privately, perhaps, a flicker of understanding, a grudging appreciation for her ability to dissect the very society he found so suffocating, might have crossed his mind. He was a man obsessed with rebellion, and Austen, in her quiet way, was subtly subverting societal expectations for women in her own work. Their friendship was not one of shared confidences or direct dialogue, but a fascinating interplay of literary influence and cultural awareness across vastly different personal lives. It was the married, scandalous poet, inadvertently providing a dramatic backdrop against which the single astute novelist could home her subtle critique of human behavior and societal expectations. And it was the single novelist, with her nuanced observations of the human heart, inadvertently providing a counterpoint to the grand, often self-aggrandizing pronouncements of the poet. They were two literary giants, one living a life defined by domestic stability, albeit as a single woman observing it, the other by a chaotic lack of it, whose works spoke to each other across the vast expanse of their personal differences, forming an unlikely silent intellectual bives.